Hi and welcome to my video series on Microsoft Visual Studio. Today we're going to look at how to create stored procedures and also missing parameter stored procedures. Before we get started, I guess we probably need to talk about what is a stored procedure and why would we use one. Well, really, a stored procedure is really just a set of SQL commands that really has been compiled and stored and sits on the database server. Once the stored procedure has been saved on the database server, basically any client using the database can really execute the stored procedure over and over and over again without the database actually having to compile the SQL statement. Really, the advantages of this are that if you're in an organization where you've got hundreds of people using the same SQL statement to retrieve data from the database, having a stored procedure really reduces network traffic and CPU load and really improves the end user experience for all employees who are using that database. Okay, so how do we create a stored procedure? Well, it's really quite easy. All we need to do is we go right click on our database on the folder called store procedure, and we simply go add new procedure. And what it does by default, Microsoft Visual Studio gives us basically all the different structural nomenclature for a stored procedure. Okay, what's involved in this? What we see here is that it tells us we're going to create procedure. By default, we could just call it proc, and it understands that quite nicely. We need to name the procedure, and you can name this anything you want, as long as it makes sense for you later on, and it's got good nomenclature for that as well. By default, we can put a missing parameter search in there. We're going to do that in a second. We won't do that now. And we just go as, and we won't return a set at the moment, and then we would just simply do the SQL statement. I've created one here which basically tells me to get all students. So here we've got, normally we'd have create here, but because I've already created this particular stored procedure, it's now saying, now that I'm accessing it, saying, okay, do you want to alter it? So we would say create procedure, we've named it get all students, and all we're doing here is we put a simple query in that says select stnum, stname from student, and we order by the stname. Okay, so where would we access one of these stored procedures from? Well, if I go to my default ASPX page now, and I go to configure my data source, you see here we just get our normal connection string. And we see here it actually says specify a custom SQL statement or a stored procedure. So the difference between these two is that this one here, the stored procedure, is more efficient than the SQL statement. So I'll just go next, and you can see here that it says I can type the SQL statement in, or I can use this stored procedure. And if I wanted to, I could just go get all students or get all staff, and you can see here I've created a number of different stored procedures, and we could just specify the stored procedure. I'll just cancel out of that. So far in Visual Studio, we've been looking at how to create how do we represent a one-to-many relationship in our database on a Visual Studio form. And so far what we've been doing is we've been creating a SQL data source which populates the one parent field or the one field in the one-to-many relationship, and we've been creating a second SQL data source that's been populating a second grid view. And that works all really, really nicely. Of course, until we start getting so many people in our database, so for example, managed student results, we might literally have 1,000 different students sitting in our student database. If I did a drop-down box, really there'd be 1,000 students in there, and trying to select the right student becomes really not a very pleasant user experience. So what we can do is we can create a procedure that when I search for the student name, basically when I click in here and I type in, let's say, Bill Blogs, okay, the missing parameter search in here basically says, give me a following SQL statement when this particular parameter presented in this particular box equals Bill Blogs, and then it should return all of my results for Bill Blogs. And that's why we would use a missing parameter stored procedure. Okay, so how do we do this? One I prepared earlier, and it looks relatively similar to the ones I've done before. Really, all we're doing here, normally we'd have create, but again, because I've previously created this, it has the word alter rather than create. We create a procedure, and I've called this results stName parameter. So I'm going to return all the results where there's a missing parameter on the student name. The second thing we have to do, where the difference is between the simple procedure and a missing parameter procedure, stored procedure, is really I need to specify which is the parameter that I'm going to have missing. In this case, what we're going to do is we want to search on the student name. That's the one that we want to have as a missing parameter or as the variable. So we use the @ symbol and we type in the stName, and this stName comes from the report card. So I'm using a view. In a previous video we've created views, and I'm using this view here now instead of a table. So we can query a view. See here, I've got this report card, I've got all the information here. We can query views in the same way that we can query tables. So in fact, what I'm going to do is do a missing parameter search on this particular view. So I'm going to say select star, so I want to return all the information in my report card information, where the student name, and we pass in this particular variable here. So it's pretty straightforward. And I'll give you a quick demonstration of how this works. So at the moment I've got, I can search for student results. So if I type in Ben Smith, okay, basically what should happen is, well, there's probably no one with the name Ben Smith in my database in my results. So I'll have a quick look. I'll open up my results table or my report card table. I'll just have a look at the show results. And we see here there's a John Smith in this thing here. So if I go back and play this now, and I type in John Smith, JOHNSMITH, okay, we see here now that we can return all of the results for John Smith. So it's used that missing parameter search, it's thrown in the query with a missing parameter, and basically it allows us to return all the records with John Smith, which is a little bit more efficient way of representing data in real life. So that concludes my video on how to create a simple and missing parameter stored procedure.